Leading Software Teams with Jim Leonardo.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serves companies that are building mission-critical software systems. Quick announcement, we're in the second year of my software architect forums. You can sign up for them at the link in the show notes. Basically, if you lead a software team and if you're looking to collaborate with other peers in the field, then this could be for you. There's tons of educational information out there for learning how to code or the next framework and design pattern, but not so much for being able to lead groups of developers. So that's what this avenue is for. Completely free. And I really enjoy facilitating those. And so if you'd like to join us and if you fit that profile and are leading other developers, then come on out. And for those of you who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. My guest today on the show is Jim Leonardo. Jim's been building solutions for clients in the cloud on Microsoft Azure since 2012 and building solutions in general for over 20 years. And now he heads up information technology for biBerk Insurance, overseeing both software development and IT operations. Most of Jim's experience is in consulting or enterprise with a few forays into product development. Following the path of least resistance, Jim usually ended up working primarily with Microsoft tools, and the tool that is usually the best tool to use. So the Microsoft path offers less and less resistance for Jim as time goes on. And on the side, Jim is working on jimsrules.com to share his experience and shaky opinions about teamwork and leadership in software development. So Jim, welcome to the podcast. How are you, sir?
I am doing well. Glad we could huddle up. I will also plug your software architect forums. That's how we initially got connected. I think I found you and found those about the time I was relaunching the blog with a similar purpose in mind, which was to and I'll put words in your mouth if you don't mind, which is to take folks from that point where they're becoming a senior developer and they're transitioning into leading teams, starting to understand what software architecture really is and go from there. There's just not, I don't think, a lot of resources focused at that level. And I think, those of us who have been around kind of owe it to the younger folks out there who may not be that young. They may be young, who are able to, ready to make that transition to help them climb up the ladder there.
Yeah. And there is a shortage of software leaders out there, even people who can be just an engineering team lead. There's an explosion in number of programmers, and there's just not enough people with the canonical 20 years experience. And so It's a great opportunity for younger people to move into those roles because we need so many more of them.
We do. And I think looking back on my career, I kicked pretty hard. I want to say made some people grumpy about not letting myself get pulled into a full-time manager role early on in my career. I kind of felt I had a lot of room to continue to grow my technical skills. And that's what I wanted to. That's what we love about the job. Mm-hmm. Didn't want to get pulled away from it. My reasons at the time were pretty much selfish. And it's what I love doing. I didn't want to get away from the love side of things. And I think that little bit of selfishness, that pulling back from the normal way people get pushed, go as soon as you can into the leadership and go from there. It did give me more time to kind of understand what I was getting into. And I'm hoping to share a little bit of that. I've always found myself in situations where people trying to pull me into leadership. In college, I was volunteer EMT, volunteer firefighter, and right from the get-go, folks wanted me to be more involved. And that's the way it goes in a volunteer thing anyway. Everybody wants you involved. I think part of that's understanding volunteers are going to come in with a lot of energy. You want to tap into that energy.
Yeah.
I was shortly after getting out of college, an officer in the fire department. While I was there, I did that for about 8 or 9 years. And then I got involved in technology after that. I didn't swing over into programming until the 90s, where I think late 90s, when I think anybody who knew how to turn on a computer was getting a job in technology with the dot-com bubble and all that. And I was definitely in that crowd. And that's at the point where you know how technology can kind of consume your life when it becomes your career. It led me away from the firefighting side. So I haven't done that, although I still try to encourage everyone to find volunteer opportunities like that. You'll never know what you learn.
Nice. And you've done so much, not just personal software development, but running teams and running, larger, really large development organizations as well. Remember back, what was that big turning point where you said, you know what, I think I am going to allow yourself to make that shift? And do you remember one point, or was it a gradual?
It was, I'd say, in and out of leadership a few times, pushing back a little bit when I started to see it would get too far, and then say, I need to be hands-on again. I think most of my forays into leadership have been filling vacuums, maybe is the way to put it. There wasn't an obvious leader. I got tapped, and throughout my career, I've always taken I will fill the role that needs to be filled kind of perspective. Succeed as a team. Don't put yourself first. We do have to, make sure at the end of the day, we're taking home appropriate compensation and all that, right? But I have tried to not say, hey, I am just a developer. I am just a database administrator. Early on in my career, because I enjoyed the SQL side of things, some of my leaders tried to pigeonhole me into being the DBA. And as much as I do enjoy dabbling, I think there's people who really, really, really enjoy being DBAs. I enjoy the more full solution side. So I orbited in and out of leadership. Even at this point in my career, maybe I'll orbit to more of an individual contributor at some point. I am sure that's not going to be anytime soon at this stage. But fill whatever role needs to be filled. I've been the business analyst, taken business analyst courses. It was not just an accidental thing. And it's also, I really do embrace the idea of, I think various folks will call it T-shaped or V-shaped development, or being the T-shaped or the V-shaped developer, which means you're broad at a superficial level across a bunch of roles, and then you go really deep in a narrower set. And I've tried to embrace that at various points in my career. Know a little bit about the project management side of things, know a little bit about the VA side of things, know about the quality assurance, know about how you operate this thing. When you start to look at doing software architecture, if you don't know a little bit about every side, you're going to miss something that you really need to cover. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've talked to a good number of developers, even ones that I work with, and there's certain people that say, no, I want to write the next feature. I want to write code all day long.
Right.
And there is a perception among some that, okay, if I yes, I can lead others, but if I do that, I'll never be able to code again. And certainly there are, I think we all know managers out there who, whether they ever coded or whether they were ever good at coding, we don't know. And now they're managers and they literally don't even have an IDE on their computer, versus you, who you could code today and all afternoon if the need arose.
If I have to. The last time I committed code would have been in the fall last year that went to production. I then transitioned and roll a little bit. I was working for biBerk as an independent consultant. And then they asked me to come on full time to lead the IT organization. So that transition happened at the beginning of this year, and stepping into leadership of a couple 100-person organization, that takes some full-time hands-on work. So it's on weekends I get in. I still do fire up VS Code. I did actually open Visual Studio proper over the weekend and
Nice.
played around a little bit with a couple of things. But this point in my life, it is full-time working with other things, getting into a lot of the architecture side, but trusting others to go and carry that forward. So it's not just pure people management. So I do hope, though, that once I'm through the first year in this new role, I get to go back to some more of the personally fulfilling things, which is creating the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, your website, jimsrules.com, has some really interesting tips for others who are in the software leadership space for custom software. And we don't have time to go through everything, but are there a few of them that you think are just broadly applicable that just everybody needs to hear that you would prioritize?
Yeah. There's a few. The one I probably say, 3-4 times a week. If it isn't tested, it is broken. That is pretty much just a rule of life. I don't care what it is in software. That I think we can easily imagine what that means, but just about anything, if you haven't kind of put it through its purposes, you shouldn't assume that it's working. I think we've probably all been there at some point in our career where we pushed some code thinking it was good, and then that really simple one line of code turned out to have a problem, and it blew up right in your face.
Mm-hmm.
So don't make any assumptions. That's my number one thing. It's a little bit of kind of related to that.
That's rule number 14. If it isn't tested, it's broken.
Yeah, there's no order to the rules other than the order they came out in. Also related to that is, this goes back to late 90s. I was working in Visual Basic programming primarily. Mm-hmm. And at least in that kind of broader community, people talked about being a lazy programmer. Mm-hmm. And what they really meant was doing the smart thing today so you can be lazy tomorrow. So you can actually take time tomorrow, spend your time in your development cycle, do things like today we do CI/CD, we write unit tests, so we push buttons and things just happen. We put that front up work. So on when we're doing deploys, it's not an all-night effort with the whole team to get a deploy out, and you got your fingers crossed. You're kind of sure this is going to work. And if something goes wrong, it's a small thing to fix. It's not panic mode. Mm-hmm. So, those are the two things I think from a developer perspective, I would put top of the list.
Just scanning a few. One of the other ones that pops out to me is, as the size of the team grows, so does the need for formality. And people in really small teams, that context or that perspective isn't there. But then it's like, oh, let's get to a certain size, and wait a minute.
It is. It's. I think that's pretty far down the list, but another one of my favorites too, especially where we are as an organization. My relationship with biBerk goes back to 2019, and when they're starting to build a new system. Mm-hmm. We spun out of another Berkshire Hathaway insurance company. I don't know if spin out's quite the right word, but close enough. And I think 2019, there were maybe 30 or 40 people at most in IT. Now, including some of the partners we work with, that's well over 200. And you think about that kind of growth, people don't know everyone's name anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And it just manifests in so many ways. You make a small change and it ripples through to 3 other teams. You can't just go change an Azure DevOps template because you're going to break somebody else's thing. So you have to communicate it. It's being much more intentional. I say formal there, but it's being much more intentional about change. I think ultimately that formality, you got to keep it in check. We have probably all, at some point in our career, if you've been around long enough, seen where the process started to run away from the value of the process. And you got to kind of know when to peel things back too. Just because it's the way it was always done doesn't mean it's the same. It's still a good thing today.
Yeah.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Any others that you tend to find yourself repeating once a week?
Yeah, I think, and rule number one was the only one whose position was kind of intentional. Because it was rule number one, you got it. And that is know who your customer is and what your product is. I consider that to be broad advice and mostly career advice.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking even about who owns your company. If you're working for a company that is publicly traded or it's private equity owned or whatever model you have investors who aren't working day to day as part of the organization, I kind of think your first product is the value of the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even the product you're selling to your what you normally think of as your end customers. Your first product is your stock price or whatever. And that mindset helps you understand some of the otherwise mysterious decisions that may be made that don't necessarily align to what you think people want. I shamelessly stole this effectively from a Harvard economist. I'm pretty sure it was Harvard, Clayton Christensen. He's very popular for a book called The Innovator's Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it to him he's got a number of his talks that are on YouTube and various other forums where he talks about just this, really peeling back and asking, what are you selling? His classic example involved milkshakes and why milkshakes got sold first thing in the morning by McDonald's. And turned out it was because really it was a filling, something that was filling, but could be consumed one-handed. For people who are driving to work. So do check those out. Unfortunately, I do believe he has passed away. But it just was really insightful, really getting you to understanding why things are the way they are by, asking the next question. And the kind of canonical example of who is the customer and who is the product, we see that in social media all the time where we hear, people, oh my gosh, Facebook's going to start charging, to join in. And no, they're probably not, because their product is really the people coming to look at the page, right? And if they start charging, then their actual customers, who are the advertisers who are paying for those views, they're going to start to undermine that customer's product. So, yeah.
That's a good point. The product is our eyeballs.
Right. And so there's just ways you can find out what that is. I was in consulting for so long, and I applied that to understanding who my buyer was. When your buyer is the CEO, the person who's signing that statement of work, who's signing that contract, you're going to have a much different outlook. You're going to have a much different relationship than when it's the CIO, when it's a middle manager of a department. the product when you're selling to a department head is as much getting them to look good in front of their bosses as anything else. And again, when you start to get to that, what looks like irrational behavior all of a sudden becomes, or may often become, very rational.
Yeah.
And that's helping understand the world we're in. So.
Nice. So you said you put down the rules in the order that you came up with them, right?
Yeah.
So rule 83 is the last
the
one on the list.
order I wrote them down in. I was, some of them were already rattling in my head. For a couple of years, it was a running joke that I had my list of rules. Some of them were already out, were kind of already in the back of my head. So it was just, you can kind of probably, as you go through, see the rolling waves of thought as it popped into my mind there. Yeah. It is a living list. It's not done. It doesn't get added to nearly as frequently anymore. Yeah. But yeah, go ahead. Were you saying 83 there?
Yeah, that was the last number in the regular list. I was wondering how old that was.
So that is, no matter how much experience you have, there is something you can learn from someone with less experience. That is actually pretty old. It was one I realized I just hadn't written down, but 20 plus, probably closer to 30 years into this, I am routinely finding myself in situations where someone who has a couple years of experience points out something very insightful, very valuable. Not just, hey, they're the ones who have the opportunity to work in the tech all the time, like the latest framework or whatever, all the time. So they've learned it more thoroughly, but, truly insightful things. You got to carry that level of humility with you throughout. As soon as you start letting yourself rest on piles of years of experience instead of learning from everyone, then I think you start to diminish in value pretty fast.
I was reminded of that just a few weeks ago with my, how old is he now? 12, 13-year-old nephew. I put some, just educational videos on YouTube, and some of the videos, it's like, man, this is an awesome video, and it's like it only has this number of views versus some of the other ones. And he said, no, stop trying to get views. If you try to get views, you'll never get views. You need to reword it to apply to the masses, not just programmers, and then you'll get found, and a lot of people will watch the first 15 seconds of it, and then YouTube will notice that, and then YouTube will promote it, and then you'll actually get the views that you want from the people that you actually want. And like, he had this whole, because he has a little kid's YouTube video. He gets like 40,000 views for his little video. He's just playing around with it. He like figured out the algorithm, and it blew my mind. Right.
And it's trying to get out there, get past the algorithm. You just don't know when it's going to blow up. Some of the folks I know who they slugged away for years, and then they dropped something that they thought was silly or just the most rushed thing in the world, and it blew up on them. And they're like, okay, everything I thought I was doing now means nothing. Because the thing I did by accident.
Right.
But then they looked back and dug through, and then, okay, now I understand why this blew up the way it did. Yeah.
I want to ask about the special rules. Your list also has 10 special rules. What's the story behind those?
Oh, so when you look at the main rules, they're really general. I tried to stay away from anything too specific in technology wise. When I got to the specific rules, most of those are getting into being technology specific in one way or another. I think the main body of the rules are just surviving in whatever business context or life context you find yourself in was kind of the theme of those. The specific rules, again, no particular order. I personally believe C and C++ are not really general purpose programming languages anymore. I know people still do And I don't want to dismiss the people who still do use C and C++ at all, but we're not building websites. We're not building the kind of text box over data database apps that I consider more general for most of our needs. I think I had that written before Rust blew up in popularity, but it requires deeper knowledge than I think most of us, or in deeper experience, to be effective and not run into the well-known pitfalls that C and C+ can have. Again, not taking away from anyone who is living in them day in, day out. If I were to actually go write games, I probably would lean towards the Unreal Engine. I have played around with that a little bit over the years, just enough to figure out what all this game programming stuff is about, if you will. And the things they've done with C++ there are just fine in my mind. But for business apps, unless you really need hard number crunch, I don't know why any time over the course of my career you would have turned there. And now I probably would lean towards Rust or another framework to do that. So that's just an idea of like some of the specific roles.
It's one that's really, really timely. A lot of listeners will probably find interesting is rule number 7 about microservices.
Yeah.
Because there's been lots of discussion about, okay, hey, what the quote cool kids are doing microservices. If I don't want my monolith, does that mean that I have to do that? And trying to sort that out.
Yeah, and this was specifically early on when the buzzwords started erupting, and when buzzwords come out, you see everyone completely misuse the term. Nobody goes and looks at the definition. I say nobody, but very few people go and look at the definition of the thing, and they just start using the buzzword. And what we were seeing, is I was in consulting at the time, and we were seeing that most of the customers who were coming to us saying, hey, they want to adopt microservices, first they were making that mistake. They were letting a technology paradigm drive their thinking rather than let their needs lead them to that technology paradigm. And then what we would see then happen was they would start saying, okay, what's my database look like? I'm going to build a microservice on top of all my tables. And they ended up with these super granular services that you had to orchestrate multiple services to do any one thing. And if you go up to the general rules, I use Conway's law quite a bit. I like to apply Conway's law, which is when you're building a system, the shape of that system or the architecture of that system will tend to reflect, and I'm using my words here, will tend to reflect the shape of the organization that built it. So if you have 3 teams and one team is your UI team, they're going to tend to solve problems with the UI. If you have a database team, they're going to tend to solve problems with the database, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not. And so when we start building teams around microservices, people are going to tend to pack functionality into the microservices they work on. So when you do what's called the reverse Conway maneuver, you're going to say, okay, let me build my team around the architecture I want. And start to think about your microservices in that way. And so unless you got some really good frameworks in play, I don't think I want to personally manage 50 different microservices. I probably want to manage a few and make them a little more domain or functionally oriented than data oriented. In general, if our architecture is just exposing our database, we're probably not adding enough value to the services we're providing. In rare cases, that's perfectly okay, though.
Yeah. It also seems like microservices or just general splitting out applications, web services are reached for just kind of as the default. Oh, this is the way to orchestrate or just communicate between application A and application B, as opposed to really considering all the options. Do you find that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, honestly, one of the things that drove my personal cloud adoption was the ease of finding other tools kind of already there to be turned on and consumed. So we weren't just using web services. We weren't just using database. The biggest thing is getting access to various message buses, like Azure Service Bus, just being there to turn on. Can't tell you how many times, we had queuing mechanisms, but before the cloud, those queuing mechanisms were just a database table. And you worked it all out through there. That's not necessarily the best paradigm. Databases are built in a way to do ACID type transactions, right? Which isn't necessarily what you want out of your message bus.
Right.
And it also means you're going through that single point of failure. You're going through the single point of performance where your database server has to be able to support all the transactions going in and out to retrieve data, and also do this possibly more time sensitive thing of serving up a queue. And frankly, the thing that I saw most organizations actually trip up on when it came to implementing some sort of message bus was just the management side. Now you have to have a team that has to manage this whole service. So most organizations that were not adopting any kind of message bus, it was all in a database. Cloud came along, that all changed. And we can consume service bus, gRPCs getting a lot of press. We're doing a few, and I'm noticing a typo on the rules just as we're talking here. But we're starting to use gRPC for more time sensitive things, and it's just easier when you're standing up services instead of having to go through a whole, okay, now what product do we want to use? Okay, now train our administrators in installing that, appropriately administering it, making sure the footprint's completely secure. Oh, by the way, we have all Windows admins and this runs on Linux only, right? And all that. So that's, I think we are moving further forward. I am cautiously optimistic for where some of the things we're learning about microservice will take us, while realizing a lot of teams went too far and are kind of reacting the other direction right now. So,
nice.
It's finding the balance. Ultimately, I don't think microservices represent brand new concept or 5-year-old concepts at this point. It is that same idea of componentization that has been around forever. I think we're in a better place with it, but we're always going to be learning. And if we stop learning, then the whole paradigm's probably gotten stale and time to look for a new one.
Yeah. Well, I would love to go through the whole list,
right?
But with our time, you've kind of highlighted a few. As we close up here, may I just call out a few that kind of caught my eye? I know we don't have time to go into them, but as I was kind of reading through, and they I don't know, they spoke to me, so I got a few of those. Automated tests are my pillow to help you sleep at night. A leader's job is to support the team. Most org charts are upside down. Love that. No one is a zero. They either add to the team or take away from it. It's not, no one's a net neutral, I think. So that's awesome.
Right.
The next one is keeping standards high ultimately creates a better work environment. Yes. When you prepare to teach something, you usually learn more than your potential students. Always. And then for the products people, minimum viable product or MVP, minimum viable products are the start, not the end of a program. So true.
Yeah.
So true. These are good lists.
I expect to add a few more things. This is by no means a complete list. It is just my list of things I decided to codify for myself. Just to one of the things you caught out, when you prepare to teach something, you usually learn more than your potential students. I do write a monthly post around things just to that purpose. Right now, I'm working through the hiring process when the shoe dropped for me a month or so ago that, you know what? Nobody ever taught me how to write a job description to put a requisition out there to start getting applicants.
Yeah.
just kind of got into some practices and had to do some of my own homework. Probably a good thing to start writing down and get my thoughts out there, see if other people have other thoughts and get it out there. It is the hardest part of our job as a manager, and yet we probably get the least actual coaching on it.
Yeah. Good point. Some of the most important skills aren't actually taught.
Right.
But I think of every company has salespeople. But I look around all these universities, they have marketing degrees, but where's the sales degree? It just baffles me to this day. There's so few and far between.
It's taught. Like almost an apprenticeship model. That's the only way I've seen it.
Yeah.
The people who I think of who've been really good sellers, they point back to the person who mentored them. They didn't learn it. They kind of drifted into it. And if they got successful, there was the person they point to, and that was what got them there.
Yeah.
And maybe that's perfectly fine that there's not a college degree in selling.
Maybe.
I don't know,
Yeah. Well, I look at so many potential jobs and there's not always a clear school for that particular job. But Jim, thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing with us Jim's rules and your take on leading software teams. This is great.
And thank you. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.